Sometimes horror fills a void in us that only being scared can achieve. Sometimes horror makes us whole again. Dead Space is not only one of the scariest games ever made, but also one of the most innovative, nuanced and compelling pieces of media out there. It explores a lot of ideas to what you might value in a horror game, whether that's physical or psychological terror. Dead Space has you covered, and it will always surprise you.
To save our souls and take us home. One day when the fixing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
Being isolated in space is horrifying in of itself. Add zombie aliens into the mix and you have one hell of a cocktail. Released in 2008 and a remake releasing not so long ago, it continues to garner praise for what it managed to achieve, with its clever game mechanics and memorable frights. Even John Carpenter himself likes the franchise. So strap him, we're boarding the USG Ishimura to see what horrors await and delving into what makes this game such an iconic masterpiece. This horrifying tale begins as a short trip set on course to board the Ishimura, where Isaac is hoping to reunite with his girlfriend Nicole after the whole ship seems to have gone dark. This opening is lengthy, and on replays makes you wish for a skip button, something I'll get onto later, but first time round, it's perfect at setting the tone of the game and the whole reason why Isaac is on this mission. It familiarizes us with him and his crew before everything goes tits up, and also introduces us to Isaac's driving force throughout this whole ordeal, Nicole. Someone who is very important. And before we land, let's just take a moment to appreciate these graphics. Every little detail has been paid attention to and given the love it deserves. I am using the remake for this video, although I will talk about the original when I need to. In my opinion, the remake is the definitive way to experience Dead Space, with its updated mechanics and shiny new character models, even if Isaac does look like Adam Sandler. It's incredibly faithful and does what all remakes should strive to do, and that's improve on the original without losing any of its integrity. After a rough landing, Isaac and the team make it onto the ship and set off to the front desk. Right off the bat, something is wrong. It's quiet. Too quiet. Like my 21st birthday party, no one showed up. The only sign of life is this creepy doll. The question of what happened will be running through your mind, and the scary part is the unknown at the moment. We know this is a horror game, but we don't know what horrors await. This philosophy of Dead Space's design comes from the original game's creator Glenn Schofield, stemming from Resident Evil, always being worried about what's around the corner, whilst also wanting to see what's exactly around the corner. We get familiar with how the suit we're wearing works, and how Isaac's health is a rig on the back of him, this actually being based on real-life scuba divers for anyone wondering where the influence came from. There is no hood in Dead Space, instead everything appears in the actual game's world, no messy menus getting in the way like a lot of games seem to love. We'll soon come to learn that Dead Space is all about immersion, and it doesn't have time to break that for anyone. We're told to get a damage report, conveniently in the adjacent room, safely behind a shutter door and some glass. What could possibly go wrong? Looking through the report, the whole ship is damaged, but before we can continue reading, without any warning, our team is attacked by grotesque monsters called necromorphs. Bullets seem to have no effect on them, only briefly stunning them. With only the door behind us being a safe option, we make a break for it, being chased by the creatures, and getting into an extremely close call. Heading down, we come across an iconic and indicative sign. Cut off their limbs is written in blood, a message that is synonymous with the game, and below it is the first weapon Isaac will pick up. The trusty plasma cutter. I just love how natural this whole segment is. There is no plain tutorial telling you how to defeat necromorphs. Instead, the game uses the environment to get the message across. We do get tutorials for the weapons themselves, but like everything else, they appear in the world and just tell you how the tool works, and that is another thing to note. These are not traditional guns, but tools you would typically find on board a mining ship. Only one of them is what you would call a normal gun. Isaac himself is not some sort of military experienced super soldier. He's a normal guy, just a regular engineer. Visceral Games wanted to make Isaac as relatable as possible, like me or you could be thrown into this situation and just have to work with what we're given. He's just a normal, relatable guy trying to survive and look for his girlfriend. So, not really relatable at all. We get familiar with the plasma cutter and how cutting off limbs actually works. This game design is enthralling. Each weapon has a primary and secondary firing mode, with each having their own time to shine. The plasma cutter can either be shot in vertical or horizontal, and this is surprisingly useful for getting your aim on body parts just right. It's the weapon you'll probably use the most throughout the game, and upgrading it at the bench using power nodes you find on board the ship can turn it into an extremely versatile weapon, being able to apply fire damage over time and having a high ammo capacity. I'm gonna shamelessly steal from Pyrocynical and put items and enemies into a tier list like he did for his Cruelty Squad video. The Plasma Cutter is going in S, it can easily carry you throughout the entire game.
The ones I saw, some of them were wearing Ishimura uniforms.
They're the crew? How the hell can they be the crew? Look at them.
We get to safety and get a call from Kendra and Hammond about what our next move should be, also learning that there are at least 1,000 people on board this ship, so that's a lot of necromorphs we're going to encounter. We're tasked with fixing the tram for the others, and this is something I'd like to bring up. We're not alone on this adventure, but we are isolated. Oftentimes our friends are just within reach, but with no way of actually getting to them. It makes it seem like there's something worth fighting for, a goal to reach almost. It's the mentality of, if we could just reach our friends, maybe everything will be alright. Fixing the tram is easy, we just have to get the parts using our waypoint glove to find the way. This is a part of the world too, even with a poster sponsoring the thing. It's realistic, as I'd imagine the crew of the Ishimura would need it in case they got lost. After all, this is a big ship, and having an indication of where to go is a huge help. I told you Dead Space is all about immersion. All the posters are a wonderful inclusion as they provide insight into how the ship worked, and also cheeky meta remarks in some cases. But reading some of them also makes you realize that there were real people on board this ship. We'll learn later that not all of them were saints, but the majority of the crew were just innocent workers doing their job, which makes it more horrifying knowing their fate, and having to deal with them once they're no longer human. Heading into one of the necessary locations, we're met with a dark room. The atmosphere here is great. You feel uneasy for whatever is waiting to jump out at you, and shortly after making a few steps, you'll be ambushed by necromorphs. However, so you don't feel too overwhelmed, the room is littered with explosive canisters. As your standard enemies, necromorphs are fantastic. They're fast but don't do that much damage, so dealing with one or two of them is easy enough. It's when they start ganging up on you when things become a challenge. It's important to keep your distance, only going in close for a stomp to finish them off. Of course, taking them out is simple as long as you know where to aim, and cutting off limbs to slow them down never gets tiring. It's always fun. Their designs are also something to point out. They're not typical looking zombies, instead they have sharp, almost knife-like arms, and their monstrous design is truly horrific, making the player feel uncomfortable whenever they get too close. A tier, all around easy enough enemies with a fun mechanic attached to them that always manages to get a good scare out of the player, even if you don't think they will. We get the data board, cutting off the power in the process, shrouding the area in darkness, just in case you thought things couldn't get any spookier. Sometimes all you have to go off is your flashlight and the surrounding sounds to know where things are coming from. I highly recommend playing this game with headphones, but don't make the same mistake as I did playing it at 3 AM in complete darkness. The monsters will get you, Jeremy. Making our way to the next objective, we pick up a stasis wristband, allowing us to slow things down for a temporary period. Great for rapidly moving objects as well as large groups of enemies, and upgrading it will also make the effect last longer and in a larger zone for crowd control. Also, doing a side quest, those being one of the many new additions in the remake, unlocks an ability where stasis can peel the flesh off of enemies. I'll talk about peeling when I get to the flamethrower, but it's an extremely useful mechanic, and this upgrade is phenomenal. Considering you need stasis for most of the puzzles and objectives, such as slowing down this door in front of us, and its usefulness dealing with enemies, it's easily an S tier item. Going forward, Isaac can head inside a bathroom and come across a morbid scene, bodies littered throughout, writings in blood stating, "He told me to bring the others." Our first sign that this whole situation is more than it seems. Something compelled this crew member to bring others to their deaths. Whether it's from insanity or from something else is unknown at the moment. What I like about scenes like this is they are completely missable, but if you pay attention to the environment, you're rewarded with visual storytelling. After using stasis to fix the tram, we head back to the ship we came in on, fighting a few enemies along the way. Getting on board, we talk about the situation we're in with another crewmate before being attacked by necromorphs, the whole ship blowing up in the process. This scene is just pure spectacle. I should mention now that Dead Space is all one long take, no cutscenes that break up gameplay, and most importantly, no loading screens, with load times being relegated to a short trip on the tram as the game loads the area you're going to. Again, it's all here to keep that immersion. Once you're in the game, you're with Isaac all the way, trapped on the ship with the horrors, just as he is. Although I don't know what the save points are supposed to be, maybe in case the crew of the Ishimura wanted to take pictures of themselves. With Resident Evil, saving is like writing chapters into a horror story you're a part of. With Dead Space, Isaac takes a mugshot. It's here we're introduced to a new enemy type, the Leaper, probably the second most common monster you will encounter. They work pretty similar to your standard necromorph, but are usually found in more open areas like in 0G or space, attacking you by doing as their name suggests and leaping towards you, doing a lot of damage if you don't get out of the way quick enough. To take them down, it's the same as usual, cut off their limbs, but without any legs, that means you have to go for the arms and abnormally long tail on the back of them. Their design is very reminiscent of a seal. No deep analysis to come from that, I just think they look cool. Although it is interesting that most enemies have the look of something animalistic, again striving away from typical zombies. Leapers are not a bad enemy, but not nearly as fun to fight as the standard necromorphs, but they can scare the absolute shit out of you if one jumps and you didn't know it was there. B tier. At this point you'll be told to head to medical, and as we do so, you'll come across the shop. This is where you can buy all sorts of useful items for Isaac, such as ammo or health kits. Item management is intrinsic to survival horror, and I think Dead Space's attempt at it works really well. You'll always need just a little bit more than you can afford, and deciding what items to buy and what to leave is always a big decision. Do you sacrifice medkits for ammo, or vice versa? You can also upgrade Isaac with suits that add more inventory slots and armor. I never found the inventory to be that useful, as I'd almost never run out of space. The armor, however, is a welcome addition, making Isaac take less damage, and this being represented diegetically with the armor plates being placed on his back and shoulders and chest. It makes you look and feel stronger. Isaac's design itself is iconic and something you'd imagine a space engineer to wear. The bronze armor almost giving off a serene, cozy feel. It's a stark contrast to everything else going on around it. I love it, and so does everyone else apparently, because you'd be surprised at how many games Isaac actually pops up in. From Fortnite and sports games to even the gosh darn Simpsons, the guy can't seem to catch a break. Chapter 2 takes us to medical, the place you don't really want to be in a zombie apocalypse. To get there, we have to unblock the way using a new tool, kinesis, allowing us to move and pick up objects in the world. This is probably just as useful as stasis, especially for puzzles, but for combat, it's fine. It can be used to chuck spears and explosive barrels at enemies, pretty much killing them instantly, although I never found myself using it that much, especially in the heat of battle. It's good for getting the upper hand at the beginning of a fight, and good if you use it in a smart way, but I am not a smart man. A tier.
Gotta hold the line. They all came back.
We find an injured woman leaning against a wall holding a rifle, with some sort of spiked hand sticking out of her. This encounter is incredible, and also terrifying. It's clear with what she says she's in shock from the horrors she's been through. After she dies, she drops the gun. It's now up to us to deal with whatever killed her, going through the same thing she did, but hopefully with a different outcome. We pick up the pulse rifle, the only typical gun in the game, and it's fine. It does as you expect and shoots bullets. It's very much a finishing off type weapon, though its secondary feature is very good, with it being able to shoot proximity mines. Extremely useful for when you know an ambush is coming. Like every weapon in the game, it has its uses, however it basically becomes redundant when you pick up much stronger ones. C tier. Medical is blocked off by barricades that we have to move. The environmental storytelling is fabulous, with even bodies being used as a defense. It's all here to keep the necromorphs out, a last-ditch effort that the survivors threw together, but as we'll soon come to learn, it was a hopeless attempt. This whole area is horrific. It's where we start to see the process of how people become necromorphs and the symptoms before they transform fully, as well as the effect this incident is having on the survivors. This is probably the most memorable scene in the game, a true what the hell moment. This situation has no longer become just a zombie apocalypse, but something more psychological. A true headbanger for sure. You probably weren't expecting this when you first boot up the game, the psychological horror Dead Space presents. I think it subverts your expectations in a very subtle but effective way, akin to games like Inscription and the anime game that everybody loves. What you think is going to happen never happens. Most of the time. Our goal is to create a bomb to blow the structure up that's blocking our path to the captain's body. So Isaac has to use his ingenuity and create something out of the equipment you would typically find in a hospital setting. This doesn't just feel like a mindless fetch quest because we're invested in the world, and creating a bomb out of materials we find is far more interesting than just finding a bomb in a corner. It's survivalistic. There's 2 areas we have to fight through to get the equipment we need, being able to tackle them in any order. As a setting, they're nice little combat arenas with vents littered throughout for random jump scares, as well as your scripted jump scares that appear naturally. I also feel for the poor sod whose wheelchair this belonged to when the necromorphs started showing up. We'll be introduced to zero gravity at this point, and as a mechanic, I think it's a nice idea that just needs a little bit more work. Even in the remake. In big open spaces, it's great being able to fly up and down. It adds verticality to certain combat scenarios. But in cramped spaces, it's clunky. Oftentimes Isaac will get stuck on the tiniest of corners. For the horror, there's still plenty of tension, even if you can fly away from enemies, because there's certain enemies that are built for it, like the previously mentioned Leapers, and a new enemy we meet, the Lurkers. These are small creatures, almost resembling a baby, just to make you feel bad about shooting them. Don't worry, they're little bastards. I love how new enemies are introduced in Dead Space. They either get a scripted moment that gets you familiar with how they work, a nice calm before the storm, or they just appear out of the shadows.
Hello there.
Lurkers are a support enemy, with their primary form of attack being free projectiles they use their tentacles to shoot you with. An easy enemy when it's just you versus them, but they become insufferable when you're trying to fight other necromorphs and you have about 3 or 4 of these things shooting at you. C tier. We get the resources for the bomb and blow a path towards the hospital. There's a great bit of tension here where to continue we have to use a battery to open a locked door, but removing it from where it currently is cuts all the power. Once we get to the hospital, it's what you expect from this sort of situation. It's tarnished, with no survivors, just a bloody mess throughout, mutilated bodies on each bed. It's clear that these people were in agony before they died. The environmental storytelling again being used to the game's advantage, making you feel sorry for these people and all they've been through. Like BioShock, the game uses audio logs to tell stories of what happened on board, most of the time being left to your imagination as they scream for help, as all Isaac can do is listen to their final moments. The only sign of life here is this doctor performing surgery on someone before doing a not very YouTube-friendly thing. Again, something isn't right here. There's some sort of greater force influencing these people's minds for them to act like this. Insanity could be an option, but we've seen too many disturbing signs at this point for crazy to just be the answer. Now, normally at this point we head to the morgue and find the captain's body, but when I went to look at the footage for this, the file was completely corrupted and just wouldn't work at all. So instead, here's a PNG demonstration of what happened because I accidentally overwrote my save and I'm too lazy to replay the game. Oh look, the captain's body. Ah, what the hell? Isaac said calmly. A big moth monster creates a necromorph from the body of the captain. This is the Infector, an enemy that makes necromorphs from corpses and makes normal enemies stronger. They're a cool inclusion, but very easy to kill if you have stasis. C tier, there's not that many of them that you will encounter in the game anyway. Once we have the captain's rig, we're told to head to engineering. However, the tram is blocked that way, so we have to go back to the starting area and take a shortcut through space, marking the start of Chapter 3. Again, zero gravity in open areas like this is great for exploring and picking up items. It really makes you feel like you're in dead space. A cool thing to note is, as you run low on oxygen, Isaac will actually gasp for air, and I also love the detail of Isaac's armor being cold whenever he enters in from space, and the more armor you get, the more chilly it appears. Little things like this just make this game stand out so much.
Yeah, but it makes no sense. They're out of fuel, the centrifuge is offline. We're tethered to a 4 trillion ton payload. Without the engines, it's dragging us down to the planet.
Can you handle it alone?
Sure, fix the centrifuge, get the fuel running, then do a full restart.
The engines are broken, so our next task is fixing those pronto. Heading onwards, you'll also be greeted with a new weapon, the Ripper, a saw that is one of my personal favourites, although not really that useful later on. It fires a blade that spins for a short amount of time, great for close combat encounters, being able to cut off limbs in a quick succession. Its secondary ability fires the blades, and upgrading it makes them ricochet. Now, this is a cool idea until you realise that the blades can also damage Isaac, so it's best not to use this feature in closed spaces. I also think this might have happened to the guy who we find this tool on, because I don't think a necromorph knows how to use a saw. A fun weapon, but not that powerful. B tier. Right next to where we pick up the Ripper will be another wrecked bathroom, this time with a message written in the mirror. No God, no fear. No God, no fear. I love the double meaning this could have. On a first playthrough, this could just be someone who's religious looking to God for answers. But when you know what happened on the Ishimura and the marker, which I'll get onto shortly, this could be one of the Unitologist writings, and its connotations could be far more sinister. It's unknown to who actually wrote this, being left to your interpretation, but my money is on it being a Unitologist. Heading into the room opposite, we can continue a side quest with information about what Nicole was doing on the ship before we arrived. It turns out the necromorphs have been here a while, and are connected to something called the Marker that the Unitologists worship. The Marker is an ancient alien relic thought to be long gone. It's the thing that has been messing everything up, and not only creating necromorphs, but also turning people loopy. It's not a coincidence that the crew of the Ishimura have Unitologists on board, and also found the Marker. To fix the ship, we have to do some small tasks, like flick some switches. The location is pretty big, but nothing too special. There are plenty of enemies throughout to keep you company, including spitters, which I completely forgot about until now. They're a pretty useless enemy that just shoot acid at you. That's it. E tier. The best part about this mission is its second objective. You have to go through decontamination, and whilst that's happening, enemies will jump you in an extremely crowded space. The setting is incredible, with the dark orange light being all we have to go off for visuals as enemies swarm you from all directions. Random encounters like this are really what make Dead Space's horror stand out. And after that, we have to fix this machine in 0G, then run away from it when it starts working again as it spins at deadly speeds. This is when Dead Space is at its best, when it's using its sci-fi setting to its advantage and never giving Isaac or the player a break. The stakes are always high, and the task is never easy. Continuing forward, we have to Isaac is attacked by a gigantic tentacle, and we have to shoot the weak spot before he's dragged away and killed. This moment has a lot of interesting history surrounding it, and I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent discussing it because it's honestly incredible how much this moment meant in the original game to Glenn Schofield. There's a video on YouTube you've probably seen called How Dead Space's Scariest Scene Almost Killed the Game, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you watch. I'll leave it linked in the description. Watch after this, of course. In the video, Schofield talks in great detail about how challenging it was to make Dead Space sounding like they had been to war with the amount of effort that went into it from the team, specifically this moment here. And whilst I wouldn't call the tentacle grabbing Isaac the scariest scene in the game, hey, I get it, you gotta make a clickbait title if you want views, I will agree that this moment is essential to Dead Space like Schofield wanted it to be. It's such a memorable scene coming out of absolutely nowhere, creating a great natural jump scare, with the tension building as it quickly drags Isaac to the unknown whilst we frantically shoot at it, and from how arduous creating it sounded with the team having to reanimate all of Isaac's movements, it's a miracle it made it into the game. This interview is phenomenal for insight and has been my main source of research for how the original was made, and whilst I don't agree on the point of Isaac being a silent protagonist, I think the remake humanizes him further with him being able to talk, especially because they brought back the man himself, Gunnar Wright. It's clear this game, the original, meant a lot to Schofield and the team. I like this guy. I hope he goes on to make more games in the future. Oh.
I want you to have it.
I don't really want this.
I mean, I'll take it if you don't want it, Alan. You don't want that.
I mean, yep, sure, here,
thanks, man.
take it.
Off to fix the engines now, and if you thought things were bad, they're only about to get worse. A thing to note is this game is loud. Sound is used to great effect when it comes to its tension and even jump scares. The ship roars like a beast in parts, and even the sound of doors opening sounds like a screeching creature. We descend further into the engines, where the rot has consumed the ship. You can almost smell the particles that permeate throughout. It's a disgusting sight to behold. Makes me wish for something to burn it all down with. Hey, wait a minute. We acquire the flamethrower, the best weapon in the game we've come across so far, and that's for one reason and one reason only.
Fire!
The flamethrower peels enemies. Remember that thing I mentioned earlier that was extremely useful? It's this, being able to tear the flesh off of necromorphs, making their limbs extremely fragile, like Mr. Glass breaking with the slightest of hits. It's an incredible weapon for what it does and how it boosts the effect of every other weapon too, especially great for saving ammo, as you only need to spray the thing for a couple of seconds before the peel effect begins to take hold, then pull out your plasma cutter or ripper and finish off the enemy in a couple of shots. Its secondary effect is also amazing, with it being able to shoot a wall of fire wherever you aim it, essentially creating a shield of flames around you if you wanted to. Now, with all this talk of me shilling the weapon, you may think it's S tier. Well, it would be if there wasn't a better weapon for peeling, and also taking out necromorphs in general, because for as useful as the flamethrower is, when it comes to much stronger enemies, they will not go down with just that on its own, and it can't be used in space. I mean, that makes sense, there's no oxygen, so a cool detail, but still bad for us, so it has to be A tier. We walk through the rot, even doing that slow walk sideways through a small wall that every AAA game seems to have, before coming to a room that has been infested with live tissue. There's even bodies on the wall that attack you if you get too close. I'm not going to rank these because they're such a nothing enemy and only appear in areas like this. I am, however, going to rank an actual enemy we find here, those being the Swarmers. These are the worst things we have to fight in the game, not because they're challenging or anything, but because of how much of an annoyance they are. If they manage to get close to Isaac, say goodbye to a chunk of your health as you spam A to get them off. If this happens in a big fight, you might be donezo, because they take a while to shake. They're F tier, and they will most likely appear in a fight because of the next enemy we encounter, the Pregnant, who can produce them if you accidentally hit them in the stomach. The Pregnant at least presents a fair challenge with a gimmick attached to them making you think on the spot, so they're B tier, and at least both of these enemies can easily be taken out with the flamethrower. Investigating one of the rooms, we can find an engineer in his last moments that looks suspiciously a hell of a lot like Isaac himself. I don't think this is a coincidence. It's not a spitting image, but the resemblance is noticeable. Perhaps the effects of the marker are starting to affect Isaac himself. But that'd never happen, right? We fix the engines, and all of a sudden, a voice can be heard on the radio. It's Nicole. She's alive, but before we can talk to her, she's cut off. We're told to head to the bridge, and thus Chapter 4 begins.
And how does losing my team fit into this theory?
Hey, knock this shit off. We're into the debris field. We get the ADS back together, or it's over.
Then meet me at the captain's nest. Daniels?
Fine. But I'm going through the ship reports, Hammond. I'm getting some answers.
We have to meet Hammond at the captain's deck, getting told more about the marker and how it was the main objective behind the Ishimura being where it was. We're also told by Kendra that Hammond is suspicious and we should keep an eye on him, so this 100% means that Kendra is going to betray us. We go to meet Hammond, getting jump scared along the way by something big. This is a sort of Chekhov's gun, setting up the creature early before we inevitably have to deal with it. Honestly, genius game design. It's now working at the back of your mind that at some point you'll have to deal with this hulking beast. Catching up with Hammond, we see that he's put one of our friends, who's now a necromorph, in an escape pod. It's clear this situation is having a severe effect on everyone, Hammond even being extremely jumpy when we first meet him. Although I don't know why he sends Chen off in an escape pod. Wouldn't putting him down be the more humane choice to make? And also, you would still have the escape pod if, I don't know, all other plans to escape failed. At least you would still have a way out. Anyway, I'm sure sending Chen away and keeping him alive won't have any consequences. We're told to fix the ADS cannons, as asteroids are damaging the ship and are about to break through to the interior. That's not good. Kendra and Hammond also talk about the marker, and I like how Isaac is kinda just in the middle of all of this. He's not bothered about what was happening on board the Ishimura or Hammond and Kendra's beef. Nicole and surviving are the only two things he's worried about. To him, the marker is just some greater force that he wants no part of, so the player has this mentality too. To us, like Isaac, the marker is just something that is in the way, and I think this is the greatest trick Dead Space pulls. But more on that later. For now, Hammond upgrades our security access, making us able to unlock level 2 doors. This is something completely new to the remake and encourages exploration more. Dead Space is almost like Metroid. That's if in Metroid Samus was an underpaid space engineer. The Metroidvania aspects of the game make it more interesting as exploration pays off, being able to find more equipment, ammo, and even stronger weapons. However, when exploring, you're more likely to run into stronger enemies, so there's a high risk, high reward aspect to it, always keeping situations engaging. One of the weapons you'll find whilst exploring is the line gun. It's sort of like the plasma cutter, but double it, with bigger girth for its main slicing beam. The miners probably used this when the plasma cutter just wasn't doing the job. It's great for taking out multiple enemies at once, but where this weapon really shines is its secondary mode, being able to shoot laser beams that obliterate anything that gets too close. If you know an ambush is coming, then put a few of these bad boys down and you'll be the one the monsters fear, and upgrading it makes the lasers last longer, makes them stronger, and makes them shoot 3 at a time. S tier. Investigating one of the locked doors will be thrown into a battle with that gigantic creature from earlier. The Brute is a sort of mini-boss you come across in the game, very intimidating and can kill you extremely easily if you're not careful. Stasis is definitely your best friend whenever you come across one, as they have armor surrounding them that protects their limbs, so you have to maneuver around them if you want to succeed in battle. They're a superb mini-boss that is not in the slightest underused, even having to fight 2 in this level alone. Again, it's an S tier. In one of the rooms we need to go to, the arena we fight in is covered in hazards, a nice change up for the gameplay, also being able to lure necromorphs into the path of the electricity, pretty much killing them instantly. The most interesting thing about this room is how these bodies have been presented. They're strung up from the ceiling. Necromorphs didn't do this, a human did, which is far more horrific in my opinion. Sure, mindless monsters are terrifying, but something a fellow human did is always going to be that much worse to witness, and this was the work of the Unitologists. Now, the remake does explore the beliefs of the Unitologists further. I just wish it was made more interesting. The best part of Dead Space's story is Isaac and Nicole. The Unitologists are kinda just an evil cult that believe the marker is the next step in human evolution. It's been done 1,000 times and it will be done 1,000 more. I do like that everything that happens makes sense in the context of the story. I just wish we got to find out more about why the Unitologists think this way, or at least in a more interesting manner into why they're so earnest to their cause. But maybe they're saving that for a Dead Space 2 remake. If you're interested in the story or not, it doesn't really matter, because I think you can still enjoy Dead Space and not be invested in the larger story going on, because it hits all the horror elements in a really satisfying way. I'll give it a pass for its background stuff and side stories. You can play this entire game and still be absolutely terrified, even if you don't care about the Unitologist's master plan, and I'll admit, this is the weaker part of Dead Space, and the thing I'm not all that interested in talking about. What I want to talk about is a short while away. The cannons are back online, but the auto-targeting is turned off, so it's up to Isaac to manually do it from the outside. A fun little gimmick that doesn't last too long. We just have to take an elevator upstairs and... This game is Silent Hill in space. You cannot tell me otherwise. I have a theory that this is Isaac, or at least a manifestation from his mind. The character model looks a lot like him, and it would make sense with how the marker gets inside a person's head. He's starting to imagine the worst outcome for him. Even the phrase "make us whole again" could be referring to how if he reunites with Nicole, he'd be whole. It's what the marker does. It brings out your worst fears and manifests them to make you think doing as it asks is for the best. I love how Isaac just shrugs this off, as well as all the other crazy things he's seeing, because it is truly like the marker is getting to him, and he just can't see it. After the cannons are fixed, Nicole contacts us and says come to medical. It's a sanctuary. I'm not sure about that, but if Nicole is there, then we must go, and this is the start of Chapter 5.
Pass to the chemical lab.
What? You said the chemical lab? I can barely hear you.
Once we get to medical, it's been cleaned up since the last time we were here. All the barricades gone. It's strangely more ominous this way, even more so due to the fact we're cut off from Kendra and Hammond. We're alone. The only thing left is what's around the corner. A man named Mercer contacts us saying we can find Nicole. Continuing onwards, we can see this guy shouldn't be trusted. There's crewmates Mercer has been experimenting on. He doesn't see these as people, but research. This guy's a Unitologist, and our primary antagonist throughout the game. Before we make it to Nicole, we'll be met with the Guardian, a necromorph that is moulded into the walls. These are a stressful enemy to say the least, being able to one-shot you if you get too close. You have to be careful when around them, and they take the piss to kill, having to cut off each tentacle. C tier.
Isaac, make us whole.
Foreshadowing is nice. It wasn't Nicole who contacted us, but Mercer. He starts talking about the marker and what it means to him, and how the effects are taking hold. Yada yada. It's an exposition dump that's not all that interesting. This is where Dead Space falters, when its not so engaging parts start to take over, and like I said at the start, a skip button would have been appreciated. You don't have to have one for the first playthrough. I get it helps maintain the illusion. But on repeats, it's tiring, hearing the same not so interesting dialogue over and over again. It's the same with not being able to skip calls from your friends. Some of these last minutes, and I already know what I'm supposed to do in that mission. I don't know, maybe that's just my ADHD brain kicking in, but parts where Mercer is telling us his master plan to bring the marker and necromorphs to Earth are not that great. There's nothing for me to get invested in when it's just evil for the sake of evil. I think this character falters because of that. The marker itself is an interesting concept, a thing that brings out the worst in people, manipulating them through their desires, but I never understood what the Unitologist's endgame was, other than everyone becoming enlightened. It's definitely a weak point for the game, but like I said, you don't have to really care about what the Unitologists are doing. I just think it could have been done better. Not to worry though, because one bad thing doesn't take away from the best thing in this level, the Hunter. The threat of this thing as Mercer talks looms at the back of Isaac, just waiting to jump out at him, and when Mercer finally shuts up and leaves, it's up to us to survive against it. It's a stalker enemy, and it cannot be killed in a traditional sense, making it the scariest monster by far. No matter what you dish out at it, it will always get back up. The sounds of it loom throughout as you wander medical, never knowing when it's going to jump out at you, always being wary of what the next room may bring. Sadly though, this segment isn't that long. If this was more like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, following you for a longer period, I think the Hunter would have been a more memorable stalker character when people bring them up in conversation. Its death is also a bit anticlimactic, with us just freezing it once and being done. And same with the other one that we have to fight. If these were more than just a button press to finish them off, they would be ranked higher, but it's A tier. Chapter 5 isn't a long one, and before you know it, we're heading into Chapter 6, and my favourite mission in the game.
Report in loop. This is Dr. Elizabeth Cross. To all survivors, turn back.
We go to hydroponics, the botanical area where the ship gets all its food resources from, as well as its oxygen. Like Arcadia in Bioshock, there's a simple explanation to how things on the ship work. It's all organic, pun intended. However, the rot from certain necromorphs is beginning to infect the area, and soon the ship will be completely out of an air supply. A new character, Cross, contacts us and tells us about the Leviathan causing the whole mess, as well as the Wheezers. A vape addict when they haven't had a puff in over 5 minutes. This is the main enemy of the level, but they don't do anything apart from create a toxic hazard for Isaac that takes a while to actually kill him. The fun comes from trying to locate all 8 of them, injecting them once found, and whilst the level does tell you where to go, I prefer just adventuring everywhere as you will find them naturally, and I think the game should have turned off the waypoint just for this mission. It would have given incentive to explore and the importance of doing so if the player had not been looking into every nook and cranny by this point. It might have made players want to go back to previous locations to see what else they missed. Nevertheless, this mission is still extremely fun, presenting the player with big open areas for combat, as well as plenty of scares along the way. A lot of natural ones too, like this pregnant that gave me a heart attack when I was just doing some exploring. You'll also find the best weapon in the game in this level, the Force Gun. It does peel damage, as well as just pushing everything in its path to the Shadow Realm. After one shot, an entire enemy will be completely peeled, and after another, it's finished. Its secondary fire is just as useful, pulling everything in the vicinity towards where it's shot, either killing them or making it extremely easy for you to. Easily an S tier item, and it's the top of that list. The 2 areas you visit are almost like yin and yang. The first is this clean greenhouse with ambient bird sounds and a surprisingly calm atmosphere. Then the second is modern day Florida. It shows you what will happen if you don't succeed in removing all the Wheezers, and I think it does a fantastic job at portraying the threat of the toxins they emit. Even the enemies are starting to get more gross, like these new ones, exploders, that have a rotten sack attached to them that blow up if they get too close. I like that you can shoot this off and use it as a projectile. It's fun. B tier enemy. I'll put the Wheezer in E, only ranking them because they have a funny name. The effects of the Wheezers isn't the only thing getting to Isaac, because he's beginning to hallucinate nursery rhymes now, primarily Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I'm not gonna play it out of fear of copyright, but this song is synonymous with Dead Space. It's creepy in this setting, but even darker when you learn its meaning in the game. Isaac and Nicole wanted kids, but never had the chance before the Ishimura incident, and this could be here as a way to toy with Isaac and play with his emotions. Again, the marker is getting to him, and even Kendra, it seems, with her saying she's been seeing her dead brother on board the ship. Funnily enough, Nicole actually does contact us in this level, for real this time, but there's no way Isaac could be hallucinating dead loved ones, right? And look, even the first letter of each chapter so far has spelled out Nicole. Still another 6 chapters to go, but I'm sure it spells out something nice like Nicole is well or something. We get rid of the Weezers and challenge the Leviathan to a fight. It's not too difficult, more of a spectacle, but it's still fun and intimidating the way it's set up, looming in the darkness. C-tier, it's alright.
But if you can find that SOS beacon, call for rescue.
I will. Mining deck. Okay, got it. And if I meet Jacob?
Tell him. I'll find him.
After launching the Leviathan into space, Chapter 7 tasks us with sending out a distress beacon, and if you ask me, this level is where some of the cracks start to form. Just a little bit. As much as I love Dead Space with all of my heart, the next few chapters are definitely the weakest, with combat taking center stage and being the main priority. It's always fun fighting monsters, though there's just one too many fights in big open spaces here. It sacrifices some of the horror when the game just becomes full-on action, a lot like how the later half of Resident Evil 4 did. It doesn't seem as meticulously designed anymore, when fights just become predictable. Luckily, there's still good to be found as we're reunited with Nicole. For real this time. Look, she's actually there. It's great that she's just out of reach. The game is teasing Isaac once again. We learn that Nicole was helping people leave Unitology, one of whom was Isaac's mom. We also pick up more details on how the marker manipulates genetic code and how it caused the outbreak. Now this is the interesting stuff. I don't care about the Unitologists themselves, but the marker and its lore is fascinating. It's even starting to cause migraines within the group.
Another one. I'm getting weird feedback spikes on local comms.
If whatever's wrong with the comms array is spreading?
No, that's not it. So, the door to communications should be open. You can head down to the comms control station. And Isaac, watch what you say. I think someone's listening in.
Once the beacon is sent out, we head back to the bridge to activate it. Nothing too important happens in this chapter, apart from having to do this stupid puzzle. As well as dealing with a new enemy, the Divider. I really like this one, because shooting off its limbs is deadly, causing the thing to split off into a bunch of different parts, and all swarm you. It's an interesting mechanic, and one where just dishing out as much damage is the correct way of handling it. I also love how it's presented, just walking around the corner ready to mess you up. I just wish we got to see more of the Dividers, because there's only a few in the game, and for that reason, it's B tier. Once we establish contact with the Valor, we're met with a pre-recorded message stating they're going to open the escape pod that Hammond sent once it reaches them. You know, the one containing a necromorph version of Chen? I did tell you it was a bad idea. It's up to us to try and contact them before this happens, but before we can do so, the signal is being blocked off by the Leviathan. It's latched itself onto the ship, and the only thing that will get it off are the ADS cannons. It's a more interesting fight than the last because there's a gimmick attached to it, but again, nothing amazing. Dead Space definitely lacks when it comes to its bosses. I think there was an opportunity to create some really unique fights in the game, and I think they missed out heavily. This fight is going in B, better than before, but still disappointing. Once the Leviathan is gone for good, we contact the Valor. Diabolus Ex Machina. This is definitely a weak bit of writing. I'm sure they could have figured a way for the necromorphs to get onto the ship naturally, rather than something that just feels a tiny bit forced. It was set up, but it was such a stupid mistake that the characters shouldn't have made, and you think they would have avoided something so asinine. It's clear it was only here to set this whole gameplay segment up, rather than being in service of the story. Hammond tells us he's found an escape ship. That's good news. The bad news is it's missing a singularity core, so we have to board the Valor and salvage that one. And thankfully, after 2 pretty disappointing chapters, the game starts getting more interesting again for its endgame. We are so back.
I need you to handle that nuke right away, before something sets it off.
Handle 12 megatons? You know I'm not a nuclear engineer, right?
I don't need you to be. Just stabilize the warhead and eject it away from the Ishimura.
Christ, Hammond.
No one trained you to carve up monsters with a plasma cutter either. You haven't let us down yet.
We enter the Valor, and it's already been trashed in such a short period. We get to see the chaos as it happens this time, rather than just the aftermath, and it's brutal. All the fresh coats of blood that decorate the scenery, it's a gore fest. I can't even show half of the locations. We see the aftermath of Chen's escape pod, and it's horrendous. I'm gonna have to censor it because it looks like 100 cans of tomato soup got spilled. I do hope this video doesn't get demonetized, or even worse, age restricted, but if it does, or even doesn't, please like, comment, and share. It will really help me out a lot. After all, those medpacks aren't cheap. There are arenas to fight through on the Valor, but they seem less scripted, and the survival horror elements have returned. With a variant of the regular necromorphs appearing, they move extremely fast and frantically. These are the soldiers of the Valor, whose stasis modules have fused to their bodies once their monster is causing this effect. I don't feel I need to rank them because they are just standard enemies with a neat gimmick that I thought I should bring up. Our first goal is disposing of the warhead currently on board. To do so, we have to disarm it. However, one of those pesky exploders gets in the way. You can't just shoot the explosive sack, you know, because of the nuclear bomb, so you can either work around the thing or cut off its limbs to neutralize it. If I had a complaint about this part, it's that I think they should have added more exploders rather than just the one. It would have added more tension to the whole ordeal, but hey, we'll work with what we've got. On our way to the Singularity Core, you can come across a poster that states 3 teams, 1 mission. I could be looking into it a bit too much, but I think this could represent the 3 main characters, navigation being Kendra, weapons Hammond, and of course Isaac being engineering, with the 1 mission being survival. It's nothing too crazy, perhaps just a little reminder of why you're here. A new character, Dr. Kine, contacts us, a man who studied the marker, though was also the one who killed the captain, so this guy was not a very kind person. Haha. As we get to the Singularity Core, Hammond is there to greet us, and look, Chen's here too. Wait a minute. Hammond is in a state of confusion, thinking Chen is still alive, the markers got to him, or maybe just the whole situation. Either way, Hammond dies fighting off a friend of his. A sad fate for a decent character. We grab the core, and the ship starts to collapse, exploding all around us. It's a short journey to escape, being chased by necromorphs along the way, and as we escape, we're thrust back onto the Ishimura. Chapter 10 takes us to the Unitologist's main base of operations, and the contrast between this and the rest of the ship is night and day. It's clear these guys are extremists. Now, I may not be keen on who the Unitologists are as people, but a creepy cult setting as a level? Now that's my jam. These guys even have a basketball course. This is the level that has Mercer being center stage, and again, he's a lackluster villain that goes out like a bitch too. He does the only thing he's good for and sets the hunter on us, this time for a longer period. And you know what, I'm gonna bump him up on the list because it's definitely much more of a threat here and one that has a cooler method of taking him down. The rest of the level consists of trying to move the marker back to where it came from, as Dr. Kine tells us it's the only way to keep everyone safe. We don't really believe him, although taking the thing that caused this mess to Earth doesn't sound like the best idea, so we have no choice but to try and get it off the ship and back to where it belongs. If you didn't know, Dead Space takes influence from a lot of films when it comes to its horror and overall tone, the main one being Event Horizon, a film that follows the Jurassic Park man on wacky hijinks. Another one is The Thing, especially with its body horror and grotesque enemies. Isaac is even sorta like MacReady in that film, just a normal guy that just so happens to be a badass. I like that Dead Space has all of this influence and inspiration and manages to be its own thing, not just copying what things that came previously did. Dead Space has its own identity, and that's nice. My favourite thing this level does, and the remake accomplishes, is give context into Nicole and Isaac's relationship before the Ishimura incident.
You said she was herself again. You said she would be better at home. I trusted you. God. You might as well have killed him yourself.
She was better. You told me to leave for the Ishimura. You pushed me to... Go to hell, Isaac.
Nicole helped Isaac's mom leave unitology, deeming her safe to re-enter society. However, this might have been a bit too soon as she ended up game-ending herself and Isaac's dad. Isaac harbours some of the blame towards Nicole herself. It's a petty judgment, and that's the point. He knows it's not her fault, though a part of him sees it that way. It's a super interesting concept, especially for how Isaac feels guilty for this being the last conversation they had before the incident. It makes his goal to reach Nicole and keep her safe more important. He failed her once, and he can't let that happen again. On a first playthrough, you agree with him, but when you know the twist, it makes it even more heartbreaking knowing how regretful Isaac is. Getting to the escape ship, we're attacked once again by the giant tentacle, this time being an extremely tense and cinematic segment, dragging Isaac through most of the Ishimura. Luckily, Dr. Kyne managed to get the ship, and also meets up with Kendra along the way as they fly around to meet us at the hangar bay. All we have to do first is move the marker, and that's what we do for Chapter 11. It's your typical Dead Space objective. Go here, fight a few enemies, rinse and repeat twice till you've moved the marker. The real kicker from this chapter is once the marker has been placed on board the escape ship.
I work for EarthGov, cleaning up a very, very old mess. I told you and him and the Aegis 7 was off limits. The planet was one big government experiment. The marker, this divine artifact, it was built by human hands.
That's impossible. It's an alien world. The miners dug up the fucking thing.
After it was planted here a few hundred years ago.
It turns out Kendra was the rat. What a shocking twist. She'd been tasked with bringing the marker back to Earth to lock it away for good. This is a lengthy exposition dump. The points on this marker being made by humans and put here is a great twist though. It wasn't an alien outbreak, but a test engineered and managed by humans. It doesn't take away from any of the knowledge we've previously learned, it's something to reflect on, and how necromorphs weren't some freak accident. They were test subjects to the people who placed the marker here. Earth's government wanted to see what would happen, and they got their results. We find out the original marker uncovered on Earth was alien, and this one was designed to try and replicate its power. It's a critique on how we as a species tend to mess with powers we don't understand, and I think it's subtle enough with its message rather than just outright saying, humans bad. After Kendra leaves, Nicole makes contact, asking to meet her in the control room, and when we reach her, something is off. Before I talk about things, I just want to get Chapter 12 out of the way, because I have quite a bit to say about Nicole and what she represents.
You're almost there, Isaac. Get the marker to the pedestal. Hurry!
The final chapter is kinda disappointing. We stop Kendra from leaving the planet and have to transport the marker back to its place. There isn't much to be said when it comes to analysing it. We spend a little time on the planet of the marker and just fight a few groups of enemies. Maybe if this was 2 chapters here, it would have been more interesting. The great stuff comes from what we find out right before the end. If you hadn't guessed already, Nicole is dead. It's a startling revelation, one that I think works well, especially after we've just had the twist about the marker. You don't outright expect it, at least not straight away. Towards the end of the game you'll probably have your suspicions and be more skeptical, but like any good twist, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. There are signs in almost every chapter. In fact, technically every chapter, because if you take the first letter from each one, it'll spell out Nicole is dead. Spooky. Right before the Kendra twist, the USG Ishimura sign has the lights flickering on us is you, referring to how the us in Nicole and Isaac is in reality just Isaac, the you. Another thing is, everyone else sees dead loved ones or people they miss, so why wouldn't Isaac? In Chapter 12, when Nicole rings us, there's an error with the rig, like an ex you had a messy breakup with. User is not found. It recontextualizes the make us whole again phrase, giving it a new meaning now. The marker was using Isaac, and even Cross from Hydroponics, tricking them into seeing what they wanted to see, just so it could be returned to its resting place. Make Us Whole Again was never about Isaac and Nicole's relationship, it was about what the marker wanted. Most importantly, this twist adds another level of horror, the bit of horror that I think Dead Space manages to pull off the scariest, and that's personal horror, which I'd like to talk about. You're this deep into the video essay, you've got time. I think it's the scariest subgenre of horror, when it's psychological to a character in the story, and it's done so well that we can attach ourselves to that character and know exactly what they're feeling. Silent Hill is fantastic at doing this, especially with James from Silent Hill 2. Every monster, every bit of symbolism, it's all strictly targeted at James. I didn't kill my wife, but this story has the same effect on me because I can put myself in James's crazy shoes and relate to his struggles because of how they're presented. The same with Heather from Silent Hill 3. The game shows her fears of adulthood and just what it's like to be a woman. And spoiler alert, I ain't no girl, but this game really makes me feel like Heather from Silent Hill 3. Something that is a worst character's fear is always going to be terrifying to that person. It's how the game or movie conveys that to make it scary to the viewer, which is the interesting part. Personal horror pops up in things that aren't even horror, such as Arkham Asylum with Scarecrow messing with Bruce's already pretty messed up mind.
Officer Bowles.
Each fear toxin-induced segment gives insight into Bruce's psyche, his fears, insecurities, and the fun comes from overcoming them. We see how his parents' death goes into why he's Batman and how he thinks about it every day. Even his fears of being just as crazy as his villains pops up, with his character model flashing in a blink and you'll miss it moment into Scarecrow at some parts. All these moments of personal horror are here to really make you feel like Batman, Arkham Asylum. My personal horror would be playing the Callisto Protocol again. Dead Space would be scary without all this Nicole stuff. It's a fantastically intense game not for the faint of heart, but add that extra level of personal horror and you don't end up with a good horror game, you end up with a legendary one. Everything we've done up until this point has all been a lie, and essentially for nothing. All it's done is just ruined Isaac's mental state. Everything he's ever cared about is gone, and there's nothing he can do about it. And his guilty conscience and the effects of the marker are not just gonna let that slide. Isaac never got to apologize to Nicole, he never got to make up with her. Just imagine what the poor guy must be feeling right now. We've gone from an intense horror game to a deeply emotional one for our main character. I like that the final boss is right after we found out Nicole isn't with us anymore, because Isaac doesn't have time to process the information correctly, which leads to a satisfying ending to a horror game. He's thrown into the biggest fight of his life, and the boss itself is definitely an improvement, and the best in the game, with 3 phases and the final one being a one-shot if you're not careful, so A tier, it's pretty good. Once Isaac has beaten the hive mind and is finally about to escape, the game ends with a jump scare, revealing Nicole is still a part of him. Isaac did make them whole again, but in the worst possible way. Nicole represents Isaac's worst fears, and the fact that he now has Ghost Nicole as a constant reminder of them is definitely going to haunt him. It sets up a sequel that will dive further into the madness, one that I will love to cover, as it's much more story oriented, and has one of my favourite endings to a video game.
What?
So if this video does well and you want it, I'll probably talk about it in the future, so smash like for Isaac. As for Dead Space, it's a masterpiece, one that we all look back on fondly, a great horror game that explores the ideas of guilt and regret under the facade of an alien apocalypse, a psychological horror hidden just behind the curtain. The twist of this being a very personal tale for Isaac is really what makes Dead Space stand out amongst other horror titles, because it gives the character actual stakes. It elevates all the other horror surrounding it, making this one a lucky day for our main character, and replaying it gives a new context onto everything you learn. It's not the first ever game to do an alien outbreak, but it's the first to ever do it like this, using influence from other horror media and implementing it flawlessly, whilst creating something entirely new from it all. Cutting off limbs, the necromorphs, the design of the HUD, the marker in Nicole, Isaac Clarke himself, it's all Dead Space, and it's all what makes it so exceptional. The game has flaws, after all nothing is perfect, but when its flaws are only minor issues, it's easy to look past them. The only thing that is going to have major issues is Isaac after today. Let's get into that time where I'm supposed to come to some sort of conclusion, so I'd like to ask one final question. For a horror game, for a horror product, did it make us whole again? I don't know about you, but I felt pretty damn scared. Oh shit, I forgot to rank the contact beam.
Walking for miles, it helps me clear my head.
Thank you for watching. I'm definitely not just adding this part to stretch the video length out at all, not me, I wouldn't do such a devious thing, but seriously, if you made it this far, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I've been working on this video for months, and I'm pretty proud of it, and I hope you enjoyed it dearly. I'm working on something at the moment for next month's video, spoilers, it involves Borderlands for the movie release, and I can't wait to crack on with it. So look out for it. Once again, thank you, and I shall see you all later. I'm just gonna let the music play just for a little bit, maybe a minute or two, because it's good music, you know, you want to hear it before the video ends, you know, it's a good send-off and whatnot. Alright, thank you, bye-bye.
Oh, I'm drowning in the fire. Ooh, I'm drowning in the fire. Even if it's just inside my head, and I want to expire and do all the things I said.